Over time, it's not uncommon for the cable to separate from the plug end of an extension cord. And when that happens, it exposes the wires inside. Do you need to throw the extension cord out when this happens? No. Today I'm going to show you how you can fix the end of the extension cord. And this can save you from having to buy a new extension cord. When the extension cord was manufactured, the cable was connected to the plug either by adhesive or just by friction. But over time, with plugging and unplugging, pulling the cable around, that bond loosens up and then it starts to separate. And this separation happens even faster if you're holding just the cord when you unplug a tool. Instead, always make sure you're holding on to the plug. These exposed wires are a potential hazard because the insulation can be cut, cause a short, or even worse problems. The cost of extension cords, like anything made from copper, has gone up extensively in the last few years. A brand new 16 gauge, brand name 50-foot extension cord could cost $25 or more. But you can buy replacement ends for around $4 to $6. And this is a relatively simple project that most DIYers can take on themselves using just wire cutters, wire strippers, a screwdriver, and a sharp knife. Let me show you how this is done. First, get the correct plug end. Now on my cord, it's the female end that's the problem, so I got a female end. Now you do have different options when you're looking for these replacement ends. This is the one I like to use, and it's more of a commercial grade type of plug end. Now there are three reasons I like to use these more commercial grade type plug ends. First, it's made of hard plastic. I think it's going to last longer when we're dragging around outside or inside because it's hard plastic. Second, it has a separate clamp that clamps the cable as it comes into the plug. So I think this is a better option than just some friction because this is a secure clamp. And then third, when you attach the stranded wires from the cable to the terminals, they have these plates that you put them under and then screw the plates down. This I find is much better than having to wrap a stranded wire around a terminal screw because often when you tighten that terminal screw, it spreads or even breaks some of those strands of the wire. So that's why I use these more commercial grade. Now they're made by Leviton, which is a very well-known name in the electrical industry. They come in both female or male versions, and I'll link in the description to these particular plugs so you can buy them. Use wire cutters or the blade of your wire stripper to cleanly cut the cord before where the damage is or is separated from the plug end. The plug end has these three screws, so just open it up by unscrewing these screws using a number 2 Phillips screwdriver. And when you've got all three screws undone, you'll notice that it comes into two parts. So the first part here is where the plug goes in. This is where the wires are going to attach. And the other end is where the cable's going to go into this end and be clamped. And then the cable will come through and then the wires will attach here to this end. For the moment, set aside the plug end with the terminal screws. We're going to take our cable and we're going to measure the sheathing that we need to cut off. So I'm going to place it so that I measure from where the end, the separation of the two pieces, to where the clamp is going to be, and mark right here is where I need to cut the sheathing off. Now, you have to be careful cutting any of the sheathing or the insulation off of these wires. So I'm going to use a very sharp knife and I'm going to just gently score around this exterior sheathing. I'm not cutting too deep. I certainly don't want to cut too much. I just want to cut it so that it's mostly cut. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pull it apart. Now I have, usually there's also this sort of extra insulation here, which could be paper, or here it's sort of fibrous. So you can go ahead and take your knife and trim that off as well. And now we can see we have the typical 3 wires, the green for the ground, the white for the neutral, and the black for the hot. Now we need to strip each of these individual wires. But these are different than your Romex. These are stranded wires. That's what makes them so flexible. And that's why on a wire stripper, like my Milwaukee 6-in-1 electrician pliers here, there are 2 sets of markings. There's solid wire markings here, and there's stranded wire markings here. If your wire stripper does not have stranded wire markings, then you might want to consider getting one that does. So the question then becomes, what gauge of stranded wire are we working with? Now sometimes you can look at the jacket of the cable and it'll tell you, but the markings on this cable have either worn off or they weren't there to start with. But some cables do have it. In absence of that, what you want to do is you want to select a gauge where the hole is going to be larger than the one that you think you need. Now, many extension cords, residential type extension cords, are either 16 or 18 gauge stranded wire. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to think maybe mine is 16. So what I'm going to select is actually the 14 gauge cutter here for the stranded wire section, because I want to go larger. I don't want to cut into the stranded wires, because if you cut into the stranded wires through the insulation, then you can actually cut some of the strands of the wire, and that'll impact performance. To know how much insulation to strip, on the back of the actual plug end, right here, there is a strip gauge. So we know we can line this up, and now we know exactly how much insulation to strip from each of the wires. So I know where I have to cut. I'm going to start with the green wire here. I'm going to line it up with the 14 gauge stranded wire hole. Going to push and then use my thumb, press, and off. Now you can see there are none of the strands of the wires that were cut. This is what you want to achieve, a stranded wire that is fully intact. Next, I'll strip my white or neutral wire. It does sometimes take a little effort because the cutters are not going all the way to where the stranded wires are, which is exactly what you want so you don't damage any of those the strands in the wire. And then finally, my black or live wire. For each of these, because they are stranded, what you want to do is you want to twist them together so that they are more of a solid type of wire before we connect them. Now that we have our 3 wires stripped, what we're going to do is we're going to open up the clamp end. Again, this has a Phillips screwdriver needed, so we'll just open up the clamp end. We'll stick the cable through the clamp end, making sure that the cable sheathing here is going to be caught by the clamp, but we're not going to tighten the clamp yet because we need to attach each of the wires to their respective terminals here. Now for each of the terminals, what you want to do is you want to use your screwdriver to unscrew the terminal so that the plate is separated, and you can see the spot here where the cable, the sort of semi-round here, that's where the cable is going to slide in, and then the plate is going to close on it. So for each of our green, white, and black wires, we want to unscrew the terminal screw and make sure that our plate is now having an opening with this round area. Now what we're going to do is we're going to attach the wires. So again, we have a green terminal screw, which is for our green ground, the white terminal screw for our white neutral, and the gold terminal screw for our black wire. So I'm going to place, again, you have to make sure that the plate is open. I'm going to place my green wire because it's been twisted. The strands shouldn't have a problem going to place it in so it's in nice and secure. Now I can take my screwdriver and tighten that plate down on the stranded wire. So now that's tight. I can move around to the white. Insert that. Again, taking care to make sure that none of the strands comes loose. Now I can tighten that with the screwdriver as well. And then finally, my black wire. If this twisting comes untwisted a bit, retwist it again. And get that in there. And then tighten it down. So now I have all of the wires properly connected. Now I can slide my end on and line up. The screws only line up in one direction. There are 2 and 1 down at the bottom, similar to the screws here. So line that up. And because we've measured, you can see that the clamp is going to clamp down on the sheathing. So what we want to do is we want to tighten our 3 screws here first. Okay, then we'll turn it around, and our clamp end, we're going to tighten our 2 screws on the clamp end here. And I like to tighten each of them a little bit at a time until one of them is completely tight, and then tighten the other one. You don't want to do this with any sort of a power drill or anything that is going to strip the screws or drive them too far. So now the cable is clamped securely. They're connected to each of the correct terminal screws inside, and we're ready to use this extension cord. In most cases, you don't need to go out and buy a new extension cord if the cable and the plug end have separated. Simply replace that plug end, and now you've saved yourself money and saved a perfectly good extension cord from ending up in the landfill. I'll put a link to all the parts and the tools I used in the description below. If you found this video helpful, here are some other videos I think you'll also find helpful. Thanks for watching.